The lobby of Hartwell Industries erupted into chaos the moment security dragged Marcus Cole toward the glass doors. Cameras flashed. Executives whispered behind manicured hands. And, at the center of it all, CEO Eleanor Hartwell stood frozen, her hands moving frantically through the air in desperate patterns no one understood. Her fingers spelled out a plea for help, again and again, but the crowd only stared. Then Marcus, the janitor they were throwing out like garbage, looked up. His hands rose, and he answered her in perfect American Sign Language. The entire room went silent. 48 hours earlier, Marcus Cole had clocked in for his night shift the same way he had for the past 3 years. Badge scan at 6:15, mop bucket filled by 6:20, the fluorescent lights of Hartwell Industries hummed their familiar song as he pushed his cart through the executive floor, invisible to everyone who passed him in the hallway. At 42, Marcus had learned to wear invisibility like armor. It protected him from questions he did not want to answer. It protected his daughter, Lily, who waited at home with her grandmother while he scrubbed toilets and emptied trash cans for $11 an hour. The world saw a janitor in blue coveralls. Marcus saw something different in his reflection. He saw a man doing whatever it took to keep his family whole after his wife's death 4 years ago. He was wiping down the conference room windows on the 32nd floor when he first noticed her. Eleanor Hartwell stood alone in her corner office, her back to the glass wall, her hands moving rapidly through the air. Most people would have assumed she was on a video call, gesturing for emphasis. Marcus knew better. He recognized the fluid grammar of American Sign Language, the way her fingers shaped words with precision and emotion. She was arguing with someone on screen, her signs sharp with frustration. Marcus's hands remembered the language before his mind caught up. His late wife, Sarah, had been deaf since birth. For 15 years, ASL had been their private poetry, the language of their love. He had signed bedtime stories to Lily when she was small. He had signed wedding vows in front of 200 guests who needed an interpreter to understand. He had signed goodbye in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and grief, holding Sarah's hand as the monitors went silent. Eleanor ended her call and turned toward the window. Their eyes met through the glass, separated by nothing but a pane of corporate architecture. For a moment, neither moved. Then Marcus did something he would later struggle to explain. He raised his right hand and signed a simple phrase. Rough day. Eleanor's expression shifted from surprise to something softer, something close to wonder. She signed back, You understand me? It was not a question. It was recognition. The next morning, Marcus found a handwritten note tucked into his locker in the basement supply room. Thank you for seeing me. No one here does. He should have thrown it away. He should have remembered his place in the company hierarchy, the vast distance between a corner office and a supply closet. Instead, he wrote back on a scrap of paper towel. Everyone deserves to be seen. Their silent exchanges continued for 2 weeks. Brief conversations in empty hallways after midnight, a signed joke that made her laugh without sound. Marcus told himself it meant nothing. He told himself he was simply being kind to someone isolated by her position and her disability. But when Director of Operations Victor Reinhold caught Marcus leaving a note on Eleanor's desk, everything changed. Victor's smile held no warmth. His words held only threat. Know your place, janitor, or I will make absolutely certain you lose it. The accusation came 3 days later, delivered with the bureaucratic precision of a company that had lawyers on retainer. A laptop had gone missing from the executive suite. Security footage showed Marcus entering the area during his shift, mop in hand, cleaning supplies on his cart. What the footage did not show was the 45-minute gap when the cameras mysteriously went dark. Victor Reinhold stood before the HR committee with printouts and timelines, his case built on circumstantial evidence and convenient assumptions. Marcus sat in the sterile conference room, his hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. He had not taken anything. He had never taken anything in his entire life, but he understood how this looked. a janitor with unrestricted access, a missing device worth $3,000, a system designed to believe men in expensive suits over men in wrinkled coveralls. Eleanor was not present for the hearing. Victor had scheduled it during her quarterly board meeting, a coincidence Marcus doubted was accidental. The HR director, a woman named Patricia who had never once acknowledged Marcus in the hallway, read the charges in a monotone that suggested the verdict had already been decided before anyone sat down. When they asked if he had anything to say in his defense, Marcus requested the complete security logs. Not just the footage, the metadata, the timestamps showing when cameras were activated and deactivated. Patricia exchanged a glance with Victor that communicated more than words. "We will take that under advisement," she said finally. Marcus recognized the dismissal in her carefully neutral voice. That night, Marcus did not go home to his daughter and his mother-in-law. He sat in his car in the underground parking garage, staring at the building where he had spent 3 years being invisible, being careful, being exactly what they expected. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Check your employee portal. Attach documents." The message included a screenshot of security system access logs. Someone with level 4 clearance had disabled the executive floor cameras at 9:47 p.m. They had reactivated them at 10:32 p.m. Marcus had clocked out at 9:15. He was already on the bus home when the cameras went dark. The second attachment was a list of employees with level 4 access. Victor Reinhold's name sat near the top, highlighted in yellow. Marcus stared at the evidence glowing on his phone screen. Someone inside Hartwell Industries was helping him. Someone with access to systems far above a janitor's clearance. He thought about the corner office with the glass walls. He thought about hands that spoke when voices could not. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work 2 hours early, his heart pounding against his ribs. He found Eleanor in the lobby, a translator beside her for a press interview about the company's quarterly earnings. Their eyes met across the marble floor. Marcus signed 3 words, small and quick enough that only she would notice. "I need help." Eleanor's face remained professionally neutral for the cameras, but her right hand moved slightly at her side. "Tonight." "My office." The translator never saw, neither did Victor Reinhold, who watched from the mezzanine with the cold satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won. Victor Reinhold had worked at Hartwell Industries for 12 years. He had survived 3 CEOs, 2 major restructurings, and 1 hostile takeover attempt. He had not climbed to director of operations by being careless or sentimental. He had climbed by understanding that power flows to those who control information, and information flows through systems designed and maintained by people like him. The laptop theft was not about the laptop. It was about sending a message and establishing control. Victor had noticed the notes exchanged between the CEO and the janitor. He had noticed the signed conversations through glass walls that no one else could interpret. He had noticed the way Eleanor's face changed when Marcus was nearby, softening in a way it never did during board meetings or investor calls. Eleanor Hartwell had inherited the company from her father 5 years ago. She was brilliant at strategy, relentless in negotiation, and utterly dependent on the operational infrastructure Victor had built brick by brick. Her deafness, in his view, was a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. Her growing connection to a janitor was a threat to the natural order. Both could be weaponized if necessary. The morning after Marcus requested the security logs, Victor called an all-hands meeting for the facility's staff. 23 employees gathered in the basement break room, their faces showing various shades of anxiety and resentment. Victor stood at the front, his expression arranged into something resembling concern and compassion. "As you know," he began, his voice carrying the rehearsed weight of authority, "we have experienced a serious security breach. While the investigation is ongoing, I want to assure you that we are committed to protecting honest employees from any association with criminal behavior." His eyes found Marcus in the back row and lingered there. "However, I must also remind everyone that this company has 0 tolerance for theft. Those found guilty will face immediate termination and criminal prosecution. The whispers started before Marcus even left the room. He felt his co-worker's eyes sliding away from him, the subtle shift of bodies creating distance where there had been casual camaraderie. By lunch, he was eating alone at a table no one else approached. By the end of his shift, someone had written a word on his locker in permanent marker. The word was not kind. Eleanor found him scrubbing at the letters with a rag that only smeared the ink deeper into the metal. She had come down to the basement level alone, without her usual assistant or translator. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face as she watched him work at the futile task. Her hands moved in the dim light. "I am sorry. This is my fault." Marcus shook his head, still scrubbing. "Not your fault. He is afraid of you. That is why he is doing this." Eleanor stepped closer, her signs becoming more emphatic. "I should have stopped this immediately. I should have spoken at the hearing. I was in a board meeting. By the time I heard what happened, they had already suspended you pending investigation." Marcus finally stopped scrubbing. He turned to face her fully in the cramped basement hallway. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Eleanor's hands paused. Then she signed something that would stay with Marcus for a long time. "You were the first person in 3 years who spoke to me without wanting something. You just saw me. Now I see you, and I will not let them destroy you for it." The press release went out on a Tuesday morning, timed for maximum visibility. Hartwell Industries announces internal investigation following equipment theft. Sources indicate a facilities employee is the primary suspect. Marcus read the article on his phone while sitting in his daughter's school parking lot. He had just dropped Lily off for 3rd grade. She had asked why he was home during the day instead of sleeping like usual. He had told her he was taking some time off work. The suspension was unpaid. "Company policy," they said. "Standard procedure pending the outcome of the investigation." Marcus had calculated his savings the night before, sitting at the kitchen table after Lily and her grandmother had gone to bed. He had enough for 6 weeks if he cut everything non-essential. After that, the math became impossible. Rent, utilities, his mother-in-law's medications, Lily's upcoming school field trip to the science museum. He had already told his daughter she could go. He would figure something out. He always did. Victor Reinhold had timed the public statement to coincide with shareholder communications, burying it in a larger report about quarterly performance. Eleanor learned about it the same way Marcus did, through news alerts on her phone. She sat in her corner office, reading the words that painted her janitor as a thief, and felt something cold settle in her chest. The board had approved the statement without consulting her directly. Victor had presented it as necessary reputation management, protecting the company from any association with criminal activity. He had framed it as protecting Eleanor herself. After all, the suspect had been seen entering her office multiple times. Questions were being asked about her judgment, her oversight, her fitness to lead a company of this size. Eleanor had built this company into a $2 billion enterprise. She had negotiated mergers that industry analysts said were impossible. She had done it all while navigating a world designed for people who could hear, a world that constantly underestimated her, constantly assumed her deafness meant diminished capacity. And now Victor was using that same playbook against her, weaponizing perception, manufacturing doubt. She reached for her phone and typed a message to the number she had memorized, but never saved in her contacts. "Can you meet?" The response came within minutes. "Name the place." They met at a coffee shop in Brookfield, far enough from downtown that they were unlikely to encounter anyone from Hartwell Industries. Eleanor arrived first, choosing a corner booth where she could see the door. When Marcus walked in, she noticed the new lines around his eyes, the weight of sleepless nights visible in his posture. He slid into the seat across from her and pulled a folder from his jacket. Inside were printouts of system logs, access records, and a timeline he had assembled from the evidence she had sent him. "The metadata proves I was not in the building when the cameras went dark," he signed. his movements precise and deliberate. Someone with level 4 access disabled them. Only 8 people have that clearance. Eleanor nodded. She had already run the same analysis. I know who did this, she signed back, but knowing and proving are different things. Marcus leaned forward. What do you need from me? Eleanor hesitated, her hands still for a moment. What she was about to propose would put both of them at significant risk. It would mean trusting a man she barely knew with information that could destroy her company. It would mean believing that decency still existed in a world that had given her little evidence of it. I need you to help me access the original server logs, she signed finally. The unaltered versions. Victor controls the official records, but there are backups he does not know about. My father built redundancies into the system before he died. We find those logs, we find the truth. The server room occupied the entire 4th sublevel of Hartwell Industries, a cavern of humming machines and blinking lights that kept the digital heart of the company beating. It required 3 separate keycards to access, plus a biometric scan that logged every entry. Eleanor had all 3 keycards. Marcus had a mop bucket and a legitimate reason to be anywhere in the building, at least until his suspension became termination. They went in at 2 in the morning, when the night security team was at its smallest and the backup generators ran their weekly diagnostic cycle. The noise of the generators would mask any sound they might make. The diagnostic mode would create a 15-minute window when the internal cameras switched to auxiliary power, recording at lower resolution with longer intervals between frames. Eleanor led the way through corridors she had walked hundreds of times but never truly noticed. The basement levels of her own company felt foreign in the half-darkness, industrial and humming with the life support systems of a digital empire. Marcus followed 3 steps behind, his janitor's uniform making him belong in a way her designer suit never could. At the final door, Eleanor pressed her palm to the scanner. The light turned green. She typed a 6-digit code her father had given her on his deathbed, a code that existed on no official documentation, known only to family. The door opened onto rows of black servers, their status lights blinking like stars in a metal sky. My father was paranoid about corporate espionage, Eleanor signed, her movements barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. He created a shadow backup system that mirrors all security data to an isolated server. Victor does not know it exists. No one does except me and now you. Marcus understood the weight of what she was sharing. This was not just evidence. This was trust, rendered in fiber optic cables and encrypted drives. They found the terminal her father had installed, hidden behind a false panel in the wall. Eleanor's fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating systems she had only accessed once before, on the day she learned her father had 3 months to live. The files were there. All of them. Every camera feed, every access log, every keystroke recorded on company devices. The shadow server showed what Victor had tried to hide. At 9:46 on the night of the theft, his keycard accessed the executive floor. At 9:47, he disabled the cameras using his level 4 clearance. At 10:15, he entered Eleanor's office. At 10:23, he exited carrying something under his arm. At 10:32, he reactivated the cameras and left the building through the parking garage. Eleanor stared at the screen, the evidence illuminating her face in the darkness. She had known Victor was ambitious. She had known he resented her leadership, the way she had stepped into her father's role without paying the dues he felt he had earned. But this was different. This was deliberate destruction of an innocent man's life to consolidate his own power. Her hands shook slightly as she signed to Marcus. I trusted him. For 7 years, I trusted him to run my operations. Marcus moved closer. His hands were steady as he responded. People like him count on that trust. They use it as cover. The question is, what you do now that you know. Eleanor downloaded the files to an encrypted drive. She tucked it into her jacket pocket, feeling its weight against her chest like a second heartbeat. I call an emergency board meeting, she signed. I present the evidence. I let them see who Victor really is." Marcus nodded slowly. "And what about me? What about your reputation? You are already being questioned. If you defend a janitor over your director of operations, they will use it against you." Eleanor met his eyes in the darkness. Her hands moved with quiet certainty. "Let them. I would rather lose a board seat than lose my integrity." She paused, then added something softer. "Besides, you are not just a janitor. Not to me, not anymore." The boardroom of Hartwell Industries could seat 30 people in leather chairs around a table made from a single slab of reclaimed oak. On the morning Eleanor called her emergency session, every seat was filled. Board members had flown in from New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. The company's general counsel sat at Eleanor's right hand, a stack of legal documents in front of her. Victor Reinhold sat at the far end of the table, his expression showing the polished confidence of a man who believed the meeting would end in his favor. Eleanor had arranged for a sign language interpreter, the same one she used for major announcements. But today, for the first time in her tenure as CEO, she had also arranged for something else. Marcus Cole stood at the back of the room in a clean suit borrowed from his brother-in-law, his hands clasped in front of him, his presence a statement she had not yet explained. She began with the facts. The missing laptop, the accusations leveled against an employee with no prior disciplinary issues, the suspension of a man based on circumstantial evidence, and the word of a senior executive. The board members shifted in their chairs, uncertain why they had been summoned for what seemed like a routine HR matter. Then Eleanor pulled out the encrypted drive. She connected it to the room's display system, and she showed them everything. The security logs, the timestamps, the footage of Victor entering her office during the window when the cameras were supposedly dark, captured by the shadow backup system her father had installed years before. The room went silent. Victor's face drained of color. He started to speak, but Eleanor's general counsel cut him off with a raised hand and a pointed look that suggested he consult his own attorney before saying another word. Eleanor continued signing, her interpreter translating in a clear, measured voice that carried to every corner of the room. "I promoted Victor Reinhold 7 years ago because I believed in his competence. I trusted him with the operations of this company because I thought he shared our values. I was wrong. He fabricated evidence against an innocent employee. He manipulated company systems to cover his actions. He attempted to use my disability as leverage against me, suggesting to board members that my judgment was compromised." She turned toward Marcus. "This man has worked for Hartwell Industries for 3 years. He has never had a single disciplinary issue. He has never taken a sick day. He comes early and stays late. And when he saw me struggling in a world that refuses to accommodate my deafness, he responded with kindness instead of pity. He saw me as a person, not a disability." Victor saw that connection and decided to destroy him for it. The board chairman, a 72-year-old named Richard who had served with Eleanor's father, leaned forward. His voice was heavy with the gravity of the moment. "Eleanor, this is a serious accusation. Do you have legal counsel's opinion on the authenticity of these materials?" The general counsel stood. "We have verified the authenticity of all files. The shadow backup system was installed by the late Harrison Hartwell and has been maintained by IT staff who report directly to my office, not to Mr. Reinhold's operations division. The chain of custody is clean." Victor finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled fury. "This is a setup. She is protecting her janitor boyfriend and sacrificing company leadership to do it." The room went still at the word boyfriend. Eleanor did not flinch. Her hands moved with precision. "My personal relationships are not on trial here. Your actions are, and the evidence speaks clearly. I move for immediate termination of Victor Reinhold and referral of this matter to law enforcement." The vote was unanimous. Victor stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. As security escorted him from the room, he paused at the door and looked back at Eleanor. "This is not over," he said. She met his gaze without signing a response. Some threats were not worth acknowledging. The aftermath of the board meeting moved with a speed that surprised Marcus. Within 24 hours, his suspension was lifted. Within 48 hours, the company issued a formal apology and an offer of compensation for lost wages, emotional distress, and damage to his reputation. Within 72 hours, the local news had picked up the story, framing it as a tale of corporate corruption exposed by an unlikely whistleblower. Marcus did not want to be a whistleblower. He wanted to go back to his quiet life, his night shifts, his invisible existence that kept Lily fed and his mother-in-law's medications paid for. But the story had grown beyond his control. Journalists called his personal phone. Former co-workers who had avoided him during the investigation now wanted to shake his hand and apologize for their behavior. Eleanor handled the public relations with the same precision she brought to merger negotiations. She gave exactly 3 interviews, each one carefully controlled. She emphasized the company's commitment to justice. She praised the systems her father had built that allowed the truth to emerge. She mentioned Marcus only in general terms, protecting his privacy while making clear that he had been fully vindicated. Victor Reinhold was arrested 2 weeks after his termination. The charges included filing a false police report, tampering with electronic systems, and embezzlement. The laptop, investigators discovered, had never actually been stolen. Victor had hidden it in his own office, planning to produce it later, and claim he had recovered it through his own investigation, making himself a hero while Marcus took the fall. The scheme was almost elegant in its cruelty. Victor had planned to use Marcus's disgrace to consolidate his own position, to demonstrate that the company needed stronger oversight that only he could provide. With Marcus gone and Eleanor's judgment questioned, Victor would have been perfectly positioned to push for expanded authority, perhaps even a path to the CEO chair itself. Instead, he was photographed in handcuffs outside the county courthouse, his designer suit wrinkled and his expression hollow. The image ran on the front page of the business section. Marcus saw it while eating breakfast with Lily, who was finally old enough to understand that something important had happened to her father. "Is that the bad man?" Lily asked, pointing at the newspaper spread across the kitchen table. Marcus nodded. He did something wrong, and now he has to answer for it. Lily considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old philosopher. "Good," she said finally. "People should not be mean to other people." Marcus smiled and signed the words back to her, the ASL she had been learning since she could hold her hands up. No, they should not. Eleanor requested a private meeting with Marcus the day after Victor's arrest. She chose the same coffee shop in Brookfield where they had planned their investigation. When Marcus arrived, she was already waiting, but this time she had ordered 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. Her hands moved before he could even sit down. "I want to offer you a new position, not janitorial, something that uses your actual skills." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What skills?" "I mop floors." Eleanor shook her head, a slight smile crossing her face. "You read people. You notice things others miss. You stayed calm under pressure when most people would have crumbled. I want you to join our internal compliance team. Entry level, but with room to grow. Full benefits. Salary instead of hourly wages." Marcus stared at her. "Is this because of us?" "Whatever this is between us." Eleanor's expression became serious. "No. This is because you deserve it. Because the company owes you more than an apology. Because I have watched you for months, and I know you are capable of far more than emptying trash cans." She paused, then added more softly, "Whatever this is between us, if it becomes something more, I want it to be between equals. Not between a CEO and her janitor." Marcus took a long sip of coffee, buying time to process the offer. Finally, his hands moved. "I need to think about it. I have a daughter, a routine. Changes are not easy." Eleanor nodded. "Take whatever time you need. The position will wait." Then she signed something that made his heart beat faster. And so will I. Eleanor announced her temporary leave of absence 6 weeks after Victor's arrest. The board had not requested it. The shareholders had not demanded it. But she understood that the company needed time to heal, and so did she. The stress of the investigation, the public scrutiny, the whispered questions about her judgment had taken a toll that she could no longer hide behind boardroom composure. She had spent too many nights in her corner office, staring at the city lights, wondering if she had made the right choices, wondering if the cost of truth was worth the price she had paid. The company's stock had dipped 3% in the week following Victor's arrest. Industry analysts speculated about instability in leadership. Competitors circled like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Eleanor had handled each crisis with the precision she was known for, but each victory left her more exhausted than the last. She appointed her CFO as interim CEO and scheduled 30 days away from the office. No emails, no calls, no decisions that could not wait. For the first time in her career, Eleanor Hartwell was going to rest. She booked a cabin in Vermont, far from conference rooms and quarterly reports, a place where silence was a gift rather than a barrier. The morning she left, Marcus was waiting in the lobby. He had accepted the compliance position 2 weeks earlier, after long conversations with his mother-in-law and a particularly insightful observation from Lily. "Daddy," she had said over dinner one evening, "you always tell me to be brave and try new things. Why do you not do it too?" He had no good answer for his daughter, so he had signed the offer letter and started training the following Monday. Eleanor saw him standing near the reception desk, professionally dressed in clothes that still felt unfamiliar, his posture carrying the uncertainty of a man in transition. She walked over, ignoring the curious glances of employees who had heard the rumors about their CEO and the former janitor. Her hands moved. "You did not have to come see me off," Marcus signed back. "I wanted to." Then, after a pause that stretched longer than intended, he added, "I wanted to tell you something before you go." Eleanor waited. He had never been good at this part. Sarah had always teased him about his emotional vocabulary, the way he could fix anything broken except his own ability to express feelings. But Sarah was gone, and Eleanor was here, and life was too short for cowardice. "These past months have changed me," he signed slowly, choosing each gesture with care. "Not just the job or the vindication. You, the way you see the world, the way you fight for what is right, even when it costs you everything. I do not know what this is between us. I do not know if it is appropriate or wise or anything that makes sense. But I know I want to find out. If you do." Eleanor's eyes glistened. She had spent her entire adult life in boardrooms and negotiating tables, spaces where emotion was weakness and vulnerability was a weapon your opponents would use against you. But Marcus had never been her opponent. He had been the only person in years who saw her without the armor of her position or the limitations of her disability. "I do," she signed back. "I very much do." They stood in the lobby of Hartwell Industries, surrounded by employees and security guards and the machinery of corporate power, and they let themselves be seen. Not as CEO and janitor, not as deaf and hearing, just as two people who had found something unexpected and precious in the most unlikely circumstances. Eleanor reached out and took Marcus's hand. It was the first time they had touched beyond the accidental brush of fingers in a coffee shop or the professional handshake after the board meeting. His palm was warm and calloused from years of work. Hers was smooth but strong, shaped by decades of signing her thoughts into the air. "When I come back," she signed with her free hand, "will you have dinner with me? A real dinner. Not a strategy session or an evidence review. Just us." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself since this whole ordeal began. He signed his response with the hand she was not holding. "I would like that very much." Eleanor squeezed his hand once, then released it. She picked up her bag, nodded to the security team that would drive her to the airport, and walked toward the glass doors. At the threshold, she turned back. Her hands moved one final time. 30 days. It is a promise. Marcus watched her go, feeling something warm and unfamiliar spreading through his chest. It felt like hope. The culture at Hartwell Industries shifted slowly, then all at once. It started with small things. The HR department revised its investigation procedures, implementing mandatory waiting periods before public statements and requiring corroborating evidence for accusations involving employees without disciplinary history. The security team installed redundant monitoring systems with access logs that could not be altered by any single individual. The executive floor got a new director of operations, a woman named Priya who had no interest in corporate politics and every interest in doing her job well. The janitors who had once avoided Marcus now nodded to him in the hallways. Some apologized for believing the worst. Others simply acknowledged his presence in ways they never had before. The locker, where someone had written that cruel word, had been replaced entirely. A small gesture that spoke to larger changes in how the company treated its most invisible workers. Marcus found his footing in the compliance department faster than he had expected. His years as a janitor had given him an unusual perspective on the company's inner workings. He knew which employees worked late and which ones disappeared early. He knew which departments took care of their spaces and which ones left messes for someone else to clean up. He knew where the informal power structures lay beneath the official org chart. These observations, it turned out, were valuable data points for identifying risk patterns and ethical concerns. His supervisor, a methodical man named Arthur, noted Marcus's attention to detail in his first performance review. "You see things," Arthur said, "things that people with fancy degrees miss because they have never worked on the ground. Keep doing that." Marcus thanked him and did not mention that he had learned to see by necessity, by surviving in spaces where visibility meant vulnerability. Eleanor returned from her leave, looking rested in a way Marcus had never seen. The shadows under her eyes had faded. Her shoulders no longer carried the rigid tension of constant vigilance. Her signs moved with an ease that suggested tension released, burdens temporarily set down. She resumed her position as CEO, with a clarity of purpose that impressed even the board members who had privately questioned her judgment. Their dinner happened on a Saturday night at a quiet restaurant in a neighboring town where they were unlikely to be recognized. Marcus wore a new shirt that Lily had helped him pick out, insisting on the blue one because it matched his eyes. Eleanor wore a dress that made her look less like a corporate executive and more like the person she might have been in a different life, someone unburdened by the weight of an empire. They talked for 4 hours, not about work or investigations or the future of Hartwell Industries, about childhood memories and favorite books and the strange paths that had led them both to that office building where their hands first spoke across a pane of glass. Marcus told her about Sarah, about the years of love and the months of grief, about learning to be a father and a mother simultaneously. Eleanor told him about growing up deaf in a hearing family, about the isolation and the determination, about building an empire partly to prove that she could. By the end of the evening, they had made no declarations and extracted no promises. They had simply been present with each other, two people letting down walls that had taken lifetimes to construct. When Marcus walked Eleanor to her car, she signed something that needed no translation. "Same time next week?" He nodded. And the week after that. And the week after that. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the lobby of Hartwell Industries, watching the morning light stream through the glass walls. He was waiting for Eleanor, as he did every Friday morning now, so they could walk to their favorite coffee cart together before the workday began. The company had changed. The man who once pushed a mop bucket through these halls now wore a badge that opened different doors, earned through merit and maintained through hard work. His mother-in-law no longer worried about medication costs. Lily had started taking ASL classes at school, inspired by the woman her father talked about with such warmth. Eleanor emerged from the elevator and crossed the lobby toward him. She was dressed for a board meeting later that day, polished and powerful, but her face softened when she saw him waiting. Her hands moved in the private shorthand they had developed over months of conversation. "Ready?" Marcus signed back. "Always." They walked out together, past security guards who nodded respectfully, past employees who had long since stopped speculating about the CEO and the former janitor. The gossip had faded as the relationship proved itself, built on something more substantial than scandal or proximity. They were simply two people who had found each other in improbable circumstances and chosen to see what might grow. At the coffee cart, Eleanor ordered her usual while Marcus requested something new, a seasonal blend the vendor was trying out. Small experiments, tiny risks, the vocabulary of a man learning to embrace change. They sat on their usual bench, steam rising from their cups, and watched the city move around them. The morning commuters flowed past in their predictable patterns, each one carrying their own invisible burdens, their own stories of struggle and hope. Eleanor's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with the ease of practice. "I want you to meet Lily," Marcus signed with his free hand. "Properly. Not as the CEO from my work." She understood what he was offering. An introduction to his daughter was not casual. It was an invitation into the most protected part of his life, the part he had guarded fiercely since Sarah's death. She squeezed his hand. "I would be honored." "More than you know." They finished their coffee as the morning warmed around them. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. Just two people who had learned that justice could be fought for and won, that dignity could be reclaimed after it was stolen, that connection could bloom in the most unlikely soil. The world had tried to keep them in their separate places. The system had labeled them as janitor and executive, as hearing and deaf, as powerless and powerful. But they had found a language that transcended those labels, a way of seeing each other that no organizational chart could contain. When they finally stood to begin their workday, Eleanor signed one last thing. "Whatever comes next, I am glad it is with you." Marcus smiled and signed back the only response that mattered. "So am I." They walked into Hartwell Industries together, their hands occasionally brushing, their futures uncertain but no longer separate. Some stories end with answers. This one ended with a promise, spoken in a language of hands and hearts, of seeing and being seen, and sometimes that is more than enough.